My fiancée said, "You knew I had debt when you met me. It's part of the package." I said, "Got it." Then I sat down with a lawyer to discuss packages. She found out what that meant when the prenup arrived. I, 29M, thought I knew what I was signing up for. I was wrong. The first red flag should have been when she ordered the most expensive item on the menu during our third date, then casually mentioned she'd left her wallet at home. I paid, of course, chalking it up to an honest mistake. The second red flag was when she asked me to cover her portion of the weekend getaway we'd planned together. Again, I rationalized it. Maybe she was going through a rough patch. By month 6, the pattern was undeniable. Every dinner, every movie, every shared expense somehow became my responsibility. When I finally worked up the courage to ask about her financial situation, she gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and told me she had some debt from college and her previous relationship. Nothing major, she assured me. Just part of her story. I believed her because I wanted to. She was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, charming, the type of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. My friends envied me. My parents adored her. When she moved into my apartment after 8 months together, it felt like the natural progression of a serious relationship. That's when the real picture started emerging. The credit card statements I accidentally saw while organizing mail revealed balances that made my stomach drop. Not thousands, tens of thousands. Multiple cards, all maxed out. When I confronted her about it, she didn't deny anything. Instead, she sat me down and explained that she'd been honest about having debt. She'd told me from the beginning, hadn't she? She had, technically. But there's a difference between mentioning some college loans and revealing a financial catastrophe that could sink both our futures. She assured me she was working on it. She had a plan. She just needed some time to get back on her feet. In the meantime, she'd continue contributing what she could to our shared expenses, though admittedly, that wasn't much given her debt obligations. I found myself covering rent, utilities, groceries, entertainment, essentially everything. My savings account, which I'd been building for years, began hemorrhaging money. When I raised concerns, she reminded me that relationships required sacrifice, that if I truly loved her, her problems would become our problems. The proposal happened on a beach in California during what was supposed to be a romantic vacation. I'd saved for months to afford the trip, the ring, the perfect moment. She said yes with tears in her eyes, and for a brief moment, all my financial anxieties melted away. This was the woman I wanted to spend my life with. The reality check came 2 weeks later. She'd been apartment hunting online, showing me listings for places that cost twice what I was currently paying in rent. When I suggested we should probably stick to a more modest budget, given our combined financial situation, she looked at me like I'd suggested we move into a cardboard box. She explained that she had certain standards, that she'd already compromised enough by living in my current place, which was admittedly not in the most desirable neighborhood. Now that we were engaged, she felt it was time to upgrade to something more befitting our new status as a couple planning a future together. I tried to explain that my income, while decent, couldn't support the lifestyle she seemed to envision. That's when she reminded me about her debt situation, not as an apology, but as a statement of fact. She told me I'd known about her debt when we met. It was part of the package, she said. If I'd had a problem with it, I should have walked away earlier instead of proposing and then trying to change the fundamental dynamic of our relationship. The casual way she said it, like her financial irresponsibility was just another quirky personality trait I'd have to accept, hit me like a physical blow. Part of the package. As if decades of poor financial decisions and the expectation that I'd fund her lifestyle were just something I needed to embrace as part of loving her. I told her I understood, that I got it, but what I got wasn't what she expected. The next morning, I called my company's legal department and asked for a referral to a family law attorney. I explained that I was getting married and wanted to discuss prenuptial agreements. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s, listened patiently as I outlined my situation. She asked detailed questions about my fiancé's debt load, spending habits, and contribution to our shared expenses. She inquired about my assets, savings, and earning potential. By the end of the consultation, she was taking extensive notes. She explained that prenuptial agreements could protect both parties by clearly defining financial responsibilities and asset division. In cases where one party brought significant debt into the marriage, such agreements were particularly important for protecting the other party's financial future. We scheduled a follow-up meeting to draft the document. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered financial documentation while my fiancée continued her apartment search and wedding planning. She'd started a Pinterest board with venues that cost more than some people's annual salaries. When I suggested we might want to discuss our budget, she waved me off, saying we had plenty of time to work out those details. The prenup, when it was finally ready, was thorough. It clearly delineated that any debt brought into the marriage would remain the sole responsibility of the person who incurred it. It specified that joint assets would be protected from individual creditor claims. It outlined expectations for financial contribution to shared expenses based on income ratios. Most importantly, it included provisions for what would happen if the marriage ended, including detailed asset protection and clear guidelines about debt responsibility. I had the document delivered to her office on a Thursday afternoon. She called me within an hour, her voice shaking with rage. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing. I explained calmly that she'd been right. Her debt was part of the package. I was simply making sure that package was clearly labeled. She accused me of not trusting her, of trying to control her, of fundamentally misunderstanding what marriage meant. I listened to her fury and responded that I was protecting both of us by ensuring we had clear expectations about our financial partnership. The conversation escalated quickly. She told me that if I couldn't accept her completely, including her financial situation, then maybe we weren't ready for marriage. I agreed that maybe we weren't. She hung up on me. Update 1. She didn't come home that night, or the next night. On Saturday, her sister called me to say she was staying with them while she figured things out. I used the time to think clearly without the emotional manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. I started adding up the numbers. In the 18 months we'd been together, I'd spent over $30,000 covering her expenses. Rent, food, entertainment, clothes, even some of her credit card minimum payments when she'd claimed she was short. Money I'd been saving for a house down payment, for our future, had been steadily draining away. I thought about the conversations we'd had about children, about retirement, about all the dreams that required financial stability. How could we build any kind of future when one of us was drowning in debt and the other was expected to be the perpetual lifeguard? On Monday, she returned with backup, her sister and mother. They'd clearly been briefed on the situation and came ready for battle. Her mother started by telling me that real love meant accepting someone completely, including their flaws and mistakes. I agreed, but pointed out that there was a difference between accepting someone's past and enabling their continued poor decisions. That love also meant being honest about practical realities. Her sister jumped in, saying that prenups were for people who didn't trust each other, who were already planning for divorce before they'd even gotten married. She suggested that if I really loved her sister, I'd be willing to face whatever financial challenges came our way together. I found their logic interesting. When it came to accepting her debt as part of the package, I was expected to embrace it completely. But when it came to protecting myself legally from that same debt, suddenly I was the bad guy for not having blind faith. My fiancée remained mostly quiet during this ambush, letting her family make her case. When they finally asked what I wanted, I told them the truth. I wanted a partner, not a financial dependent. I wanted someone who would work with me to build a stable future, not someone who expected me to fund their lifestyle while they ignored their responsibilities. The prenup would remain non-negotiable. They left in a fury of slammed doors and accusations. Update 2. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. Then she called, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in months. She asked if we could meet for coffee to talk things through rationally. I agreed, curious to see if she'd had a change of heart or if this was just another manipulation tactic. She arrived looking perfectly put together as always, but there was something different in her demeanor. She apologized for her family's behavior and acknowledged that the prenup had forced her to confront some truths about our relationship she'd been avoiding. She admitted that she'd gotten comfortable with me handling all the expenses, that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing it as temporary help and started viewing it as just how our relationship worked. She said she understood why that wasn't fair to me. For a moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe this was the wake-up call she needed. But then she presented her counteroffer. She'd agree to the prenup with some modifications. She wanted provisions that would protect her if the marriage ended, ensuring she wouldn't be left completely financially devastated. She also wanted to adjust the expense-sharing ratios to account for her current debt obligations. I realized she still didn't get it. She was willing to sign a legal document, but she still expected me to subsidize her lifestyle. The prenup was just another negotiation to her, not a fundamental shift in how she approached financial responsibility. I told her I needed time to think. That evening, I called my lawyer and asked her to review the proposed changes. She was diplomatically professional, but I could hear the skepticism in her voice. The modifications essentially gutted the protective elements of the original agreement while maintaining my financial obligations. My lawyer suggested I consider whether this was really about the prenup at all, or about fundamental compatibility issues that no legal document could resolve. Update 3. I made my decision over the weekend. On Monday morning, I called my fiancée and told her I needed to see her in person. She came over that evening, clearly expecting to continue our negotiation about the prenup terms. Instead, I handed her a small box. Inside was the engagement ring she'd left behind when she'd stormed out weeks earlier. I explained that I'd realized something important during our time apart. The prenup wasn't really the issue. It was just a symptom of a deeper incompatibility. She saw my financial responsibility as a resource to be utilized. I saw partnership as mutual support and shared sacrifice. Those weren't perspectives that could be reconciled with legal documents. She was quiet for a long time, turning the ring over in her hands. Finally, she asked if there was anything she could do to change my mind. Any way she could prove that she was committed to changing her approach to money and responsibility. I told her that actions over time were the only way to demonstrate that kind of change, and that I wasn't willing to bet my financial future on the possibility of transformation that might never come. She asked if I'd ever really loved her, or if I'd just been evaluating her as a financial investment the whole time. The question stung because there was some truth in it. I had loved her, the version of her that I'd thought existed. The person who was temporarily struggling but working toward independence. The partner who would eventually contribute equally to building our shared future. But I'd fallen in love with potential, not reality. And reality was sitting across from me, still trying to negotiate terms that would allow her to avoid taking full responsibility for her choices. She left quietly, taking the ring with her. I never found out if she kept it or returned it. 3 months later, I ran into her sister at a coffee shop. She mentioned that my ex-fiancé had moved back in with her parents and was working 2 jobs to tackle her debt. Part of me felt guilty for not being there to support her through that difficult time. But a bigger part of me felt relieved. She was finally handling her problems instead of expecting someone else to solve them for her. 6 months after that, I bought a house. A modest place in a good neighborhood, with a mortgage I could comfortably afford on my single income. When I signed the papers, I thought about how different this moment would have been if I'd stayed in that relationship. How much more complicated and risky this purchase would have been with her debt hanging over our shared future. I learned something important from that relationship. Love isn't about accepting everything unconditionally. It's about finding someone whose values and life approach align with yours well enough to build something sustainable together. She was right about one thing. Her debt was part of the package. But she never understood that packages can be returned if they're not what you ordered. The prenup served its purpose perfectly. It forced both of us to confront the reality of our financial partnership before we made it legally binding. It revealed that we had fundamentally different ideas about responsibility, fairness, and what it means to be equal partners in a relationship. Sometimes the best way to save a relationship is to end it before it destroys both people involved. I never regretted walking away, but I did learn to have those difficult conversations much earlier in future relationships. Money matters. Shared values matter. And anyone who dismisses those concerns as unromantic probably isn't ready for the practical realities of building a life with another person. The woman I eventually married understood that from the beginning. We never needed a prenup because we were already on the same page about financial responsibility, shared sacrifice, and what partnership actually means. But that's a different story entirely.